In August 1944, SS officer Oskar Dirlewanger walked into a Warsaw school and found 500 children with their hands raised in surrender. What happened next would become one of the most horrific war crimes in human history. To save bullets, he ordered his men to take the lives of every single child with bayonets and rifle butts. Not one survived. This is the story of the Wola Massacre, 7 days that redefined the meaning of evil. Before we dive into this nightmare, we need to understand how Europe's most civilized nation descended into barbarism, and how one man's twisted psychology would unleash hell on earth in the streets of Warsaw. September 1st, 1939. German tanks rolled across the Polish border under the false pretense of protecting ethnic Germans. It was a lie that would cost millions of lives. Within a month, 1.5 million German troops, 2,000 tanks, and 400 fighter aircraft had crushed Polish resistance. Poland was carved up between Nazi Germany and Stalin's Soviet Union like a piece of meat. What followed wasn't just occupation, it was cultural annihilation. The Nazis didn't just want to control Poland, they wanted to erase it from existence. Polish intellectuals, priests, and leaders were rounded up and executed. The Polish language was banned in schools. Children were forbidden from learning their own history. By October 1940, the Warsaw Ghetto had been established, a walled prison holding 460,000 Jewish civilians in conditions designed to kill. Disease and starvation were the weapons of choice. The message was clear: this wasn't a temporary occupation. This was the beginning of the end for Polish civilization. But the Poles refused to die quietly. Spring 1943, the Warsaw Ghetto erupted in desperate rebellion. 700 Jewish fighters, armed with smuggled weapons and homemade explosives, held off the German army for nearly a month. They knew they couldn't win, but they chose to die fighting rather than be led like sheep to slaughter. The uprising was crushed, but its impact was profound. Across occupied Poland, resistance fighters watched and learned. If 700 starving, poorly armed ghetto fighters could hold off the Wehrmacht for weeks, what could a coordinated uprising accomplish? The Polish Home Army, the Armia Krajowa, began planning. They had 50,000 fighters scattered across Warsaw, waiting for the right moment. That moment came in the summer of 1944, as Soviet tanks rolled toward the Polish capital. This is when the Warsaw Uprising begins. August 1st, 1944, 5 p.m. Church bells rang across Warsaw, not for prayer, but as a signal. Operation Tempest had begun. Polish fighters emerged from sewers, basements, and hidden bunkers. They struck German positions simultaneously across the city, catching the occupiers completely off guard. For the first time in 5 years, the Polish flag flew over Warsaw's rooftops. Citizens poured into the streets, weeping with joy. After half a decade of brutal occupation, liberation seemed within reach. The Red Army was just miles away. Surely they would help finish the job. But General Tadeusz Boryko-Morawski and his fighters had made a fatal miscalculation. They assumed the Germans would retreat as Soviet forces approached. Instead, Adolf Hitler issued a different order entirely. Imagine this. You're lying wounded in a hospital bed when armed soldiers burst through the doors. You watch helplessly as they systematically crush the skulls of patients around you, both friend and enemy alike, with rifle butts. The nurses who tried to protect you are stripped, brutalized, and hanged one by one in the courtyard outside. This wasn't a nightmare. This was Tuesday, August 8th, 1944, in Warsaw, Poland. August 4th, 1944. In his East Prussian headquarters, Adolf Hitler received reports of the Warsaw Uprising. His response was swift and merciless. The Reichsfuhrer SS received direct orders: kill anything that moves. Not just fighters, anything that moves. Men, women, children, the elderly, the wounded. Everyone. This wasn't a military strategy. This was genocide disguised as counterinsurgency. Hitler wanted to make Warsaw an example, a warning to any other city that dared resist the Reich. The message would be written in blood across the cobblestones of the Wola district. But to carry out this order, Hitler needed men capable of unthinkable brutality. He needed monsters. And he had just the man for the job. Meet Oskar Dirlewanger. September 26, 1895. Oskar Dirlewanger was born into a middle-class German family. His father was a merchant, his childhood unremarkable. Nothing in his early years suggested he would become one of history's most sadistic killers. World War I changed everything. Dirlewanger enlisted as a private at 18 and threw himself into the carnage with disturbing enthusiasm. He was wounded 6 times, earned the Iron Cross first and second class, and rose to lieutenant by war's end. But the trenches had broken something fundamental in his mind. When Germany surrendered in 1918, Dirlewanger couldn't accept peace. He joined the Freikorps, paramilitary death squads that roamed post-war Germany, crushing communist uprisings with extreme violence. These weren't soldiers, they were thugs with military training, and Dirlewanger fit right in. By 1922, he had earned a doctorate in political science from the prestigious Goethe University. On paper, he was an educated gentleman. In reality, he was a predator learning to hide in plain sight. The mask finally slipped. Dirlewanger was convicted of raping a 13-year-old girl from the League of German Girls, the female wing of Hitler Youth. He was also found guilty of embezzlement and illegal weapons possession. The Nazi Party expelled him, stripped him of his doctorate, and threw him in prison. For most men, this would have been the end. But Dirlewanger had a powerful friend, Gottlieb Berger, a high-ranking SS officer who had served with him in World War I. Berger saw potential in Dirlewanger's brutality and arranged for his early release. Between 1936 and 1939, Dirlewanger fought in Spain's Civil War as part of the Condor Legion, Nazi Germany's volunteer force supporting Franco's fascists. It was the perfect testing ground for the tactics that would later terrorize Eastern Europe. When he returned, his criminal record was expunged, his doctorate restored, and his Nazi Party membership reinstated. The pedophile and rapist was back in business. July 1940. Heinrich Himmler approved the creation of a special SS unit composed entirely of convicted criminals. Officially, they were recruited for their hunting skills to fight partisans in mountainous terrain. In reality, Himmler wanted men who could commit atrocities without hesitation. Dirlewanger was given command of what would become known as the Dirlewanger Brigade. Initially composed of convicted poachers, the unit soon expanded to include murderers, rapists, arsonists, and the criminally insane. These weren't soldiers, they were predators given uniforms and weapons. Even other SS officers were disgusted. The brigade was kept at arm's length, used only for the dirtiest work. But that was exactly what Himmler wanted, plausible deniability for the Reich's worst crimes. 1940 to 1942, Dirlewanger's first assignment was a labor camp at Stary Dziko in occupied Poland. What happened there defied human comprehension. Young Jewish women were stripped naked, whipped, and injected with strychnine while Dirlewanger's men laughed at their death convulsions. There were rumors, never fully confirmed but widely believed, that they boiled Jewish women with horse meat to make soap. Whether true or not, the story spread terror throughout occupied Poland. In February 1942, the brigade was transferred to Belarus. Their mission, eliminate partisan resistance. Their method, total extermination of civilian populations. They herded entire families into barns like cattle, then set the buildings on fire. As people tried to escape the flames, machine gunners cut them down. Those who survived the bullets burned alive. This was Dirlewanger's preferred method, the man so sadistic that even other SS officers called him a degenerate. Village after village disappeared in smoke and screams. Conservative estimates put the death toll at 30,000 Belarusian civilians, but the true number will never be known. Entire communities were erased from existence, their names surviving only in German military reports filed in triplicate. Dirlewanger ruled his brigade through fear and violence. Soldiers who disappointed him received a bullet through the hand. Those who seriously failed him got one through the head. Looting wasn't just permitted, it was encouraged as part of their compensation. But the sexual violence was systematic and ritualized. After gang-raping young women, the soldiers would inject them with strychnine and gather around to watch them die in agony. Packs of rabid dogs were released on victims for entertainment. The cruelty wasn't incidental to their mission, it was the point. This wasn't warfare. It was sadism elevated to military doctrine. August 1944. As the Warsaw Uprising raged, German commanders realized they needed reinforcements capable of extreme brutality. Regular Wehrmacht units were proving insufficient for the kind of terror campaign Hitler demanded. The call went out to Dirlewanger. His brigade, battle-hardened from years of civilian massacre, was exactly what the situation required. They arrived in Warsaw stinking of vodka, many without proper uniforms, some without weapons beyond what they could scavenge from corpses. But they brought something far more dangerous than military equipment. They brought experience in the systematic murder of defenseless people. What we know about the Wola Massacre comes largely from the testimony of Matthias Schneck, a Belgian conscript forced to fight alongside Dirlewanger's brigade. His account, preserved in military archives, provides a first-hand glimpse into hell on earth. Schneck's first sight of Dirlewanger's men was telling. They arrived drunk, dying by the dozens as they charged with reckless abandon. Many were dirty, improperly uniformed, and armed only with weapons stripped from the dead. But their leader, Dirlewanger himself, cut a distinctive figure in his black leather trench coat, urging his rabid followers forward. August 8, 1944. Schneck was ordered to blow open the doors of a large building. As the explosives detonated, cries of "Don't shoot" came from inside. What he found would haunt him for the rest of his life. It was a Red Cross hospital, a massive hall filled with wounded Polish and German soldiers lying in makeshift beds. Before Schneck could react, Dirlewanger's men burst in. The nurses begged them not to kill the Polish patients, but their pleas were ignored. What followed was systematic murder. Dirlewanger's soldiers went from bed to bed, crushing the skulls of wounded men with rifle butts. Polish patients, German patients, it didn't matter. Anyone too weak to flee was killed where they lay. Schneck managed to hide one nurse in a small room, barricading the door. But he couldn't save the others. The surviving nurses were dragged outside, stripped naked, and brutally beaten until blood ran down their legs. Then came the gang rapes, carried out in full view of anyone who cared to watch. The finale was pure theater of cruelty. One by one, the nurses were led to makeshift gallows in the courtyard. Nooses were placed around their necks, and Dirlewanger himself kicked away the chairs and bricks that served as platforms. He wanted to personally participate in their deaths, but the hospital massacre paled in comparison to what Schneck witnessed next. While clearing another building, he blew open a door and found himself face-to-face with 300 to 500 children in what appeared to be a school or daycare center. The children, some barely old enough to walk, raised their tiny hands in surrender. They had no idea what was happening, only that the adults around them were terrified. When Dirlewanger entered the building, Schneck expected him to order the children moved to safety. Instead, Dirlewanger ordered them all killed. The initial command was to shoot them, but after a few volleys, Dirlewanger changed his mind. "Save the bullets," he ordered. What followed was the systematic murder of hundreds of children with bayonets and rifle butts. Schneck watched in horror as soldiers bashed in the skulls of toddlers and stabbed elementary school children to death. Not one child survived. Not one. The use of civilians as human shields became routine. In one incident witnessed by Schneck, an SS soldier grabbed a Polish woman and her young child, placing them on top of a German tank for protection. As the tank moved forward, the child slipped and was crushed under the tracks. The mother's screams of anguish filled the air until an SS soldier put a bullet through her head. His explanation was chillingly practical, so she would scream no more. This wasn't the heat of battle or a moment of panic. It was calculated cruelty carried out with bureaucratic efficiency. Dirlewanger's method for dealing with civilians was brutally simple. Groups of people emerging from buildings with their hands raised, desperately insisting they weren't fighters, were shot on sight. No questions asked, no mercy shown. Basements became killing floors. Civilians were herded underground and executed en masse with machine guns and grenades. The bodies were left to rot or burned to destroy evidence. The stench of death hung over the Wola district like a fog. Schneck's most terrifying moment came during a brief personal encounter with Dirlewanger himself. While giving water to a gravely wounded soldier in German uniform, Dirlewanger approached and demanded to know why Schneck was helping this pig. Only then did Schneck notice the red and white armband marking the wounded man as a Polish resistance fighter. Dirlewanger handed Schneck a pistol and ordered him to execute the wounded Pole. Schneck froze, staring into the dying man's eyes, unable to pull the trigger. The pistol was snatched from his hands by another SS soldier who carried out the execution without hesitation. Only the timely intervention of a German army officer with his own grievances against Dirlewanger saved Schneck from being shot for insubordination. 7 days, 40 to 50,000 dead. These numbers are almost impossible to comprehend, but they represent individual human beings, mothers, fathers, children, grandparents, whose only crime was being in the wrong place when Hitler's rage descended on Warsaw. The killing was so gruesome, so thorough, that entire city blocks were left empty. Families that had lived in Warsaw for generations were wiped out in minutes. Children who should have grown up to rebuild Poland never saw their 6th birthday. For his role in the Wola Massacre, Oskar Dirlewanger was promoted and awarded the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, Nazi Germany's highest military decoration. The man who ordered the murder of 500 children was celebrated as a hero of the Reich. This wasn't an aberration or a cover-up. The Nazi leadership knew exactly what Dirlewanger had done, and they rewarded him for it. The massacre wasn't a war crime in their eyes. It was a successful operation. October 2nd, 1944. After 63 days of fighting, the Warsaw Uprising finally ended. The cost was staggering: 150,000 to 200,000 civilians dead, 15,200 resistance fighters killed, and over 700,000 survivors expelled from the city. Warsaw itself was destroyed. Hitler ordered that no stone be left standing on another. The city that had dared to resist the Reich would be erased from the map. But the Wola Massacre remained the uprising's darkest chapter, a week when the thin veneer of civilization was stripped away to reveal the monster lurking beneath. June 1st, 1945. Oskar Dirlewanger was arrested by French forces while hiding in civilian clothes under a false name. He was identified by a Jewish survivor of the concentration camps, one of the few people who had seen his face and lived to tell about it. Officially, Dirlewanger died of a heart attack on June 7, 1945, while in Allied custody. The truth was different. Polish guards at the detention center recognized him and beat him to death in revenge for his crimes in Warsaw. It was a violent end for a man who had lived by violence. But Dirlewanger's death was the exception, not the rule. Most of the perpetrators of the Wola Massacre escaped justice entirely. Heinz Reinfarth, who had also participated in the slaughter, not only avoided prosecution but enjoyed a successful post-war career in West Germany. He obtained a government position and retired with a general's pension. The message was clear: you could murder 50,000 civilians and still live comfortably in post-war Europe, as long as you were on the winning side when the music stopped. Today, the Wola Massacre stands as one of World War II's most horrific episodes, a week when calculated murder was elevated to state policy and carried out with industrial efficiency. It represents the logical endpoint of Nazi ideology, the complete dehumanization of entire populations. But it also serves as a warning. The men who carried out these atrocities weren't monsters from another planet. They were human beings who made choices to follow orders, choices to participate in genocide, choices to remain silent in the face of evil. Oskar Dirlewanger was born into a middle-class German family. He was educated at a prestigious university. He served his country in war and earned its highest decorations. On paper, he was a model citizen. In reality, he was a predator who found a system that rewarded his worst impulses. The Nazi regime didn't create monsters like Dirlewanger. It simply gave them uniforms and told them their cruelty was patriotic duty. The children in that Warsaw school, 500 innocent lives snuffed out to save bullets, remind us that civilization is fragile. It can disappear in a moment when good people choose to look away and evil people choose to act. Their memory demands that we never forget, never forgive, and never allow such darkness to rise again. The Wola Massacre wasn't just 7 days that redefined evil. It was 7 days that revealed the evil that had been there all along, waiting for permission to emerge from the shadows.